Oh, you're terrible.
Wait! Stop! Don't eat that food!
Who are you? What are you doing in our house?
I'm from the future. I'm here to warn you, don't eat that food.
Why not?
The eggs, they're full of cholesterol.
What?
Cholesterol, it clogs up your arteries. Eating even just one egg can dramatically increase your chance of heart attack. Don't eat eggs.
Oh my God, thank you.
You're welcome. Godspeed.
Well, I guess I better take those eggs.
Wait! Stop!
You're back!
Yeah, we were wrong about the eggs.
How?
Well, it turns out there's two types of cholesterol. There's good cholesterol and bad cholesterol, and eggs actually have both. So you can eat eggs, but just don't eat the egg yolks. So stick with the egg whites.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Godspeed. Wait! We were wrong about the eggs.
Again?
Yeah, okay, so it turns out that the amount of cholesterol in a food doesn't actually affect how much cholesterol ends up in your blood. The eggs are probably fine. In fact, we sort of don't even know what cholesterol is. But the steak! You can't eat the steak!
Why not?
Turns out that red meat increases your chance of heart attack. You have to cut out red meat. So no steak!
Thank you.
Godspeed.
What? No steak, mister.
What?
Wait! We were wrong about the steak. It's the toast. Man was not meant to eat bread.
What do you mean man was not meant to eat bread?
Well, if you think about it, human beings should really only be eating what our Paleolithic ancestors ate. So, therefore, no bread, no toast.
How do you know what our Paleolithic ancestors ate?
Well, we just have to guess, right? I mean, we don't have any way of knowing Whew. Okay. Went back to the Paleolithic. They are not doing well. I don't know what we were thinking. If anything, we should all be eating a lot more bread. Jeez. So I guess just ignore everything I've said and exercise.
Exercise, okay.
Yeah, you guys could probably use it. You've been just sitting here for the last 35 years.
It's been 5 minutes.
Right. Time travel. All right, well, Godspeed. Turns out it's genetic. Doesn't matter whether you exercise or what you eat. I'm sorry I ruined your meal.
I need 10 minutes.
Do you want some eggs?
I'd love some.
I like that video because today's scripture story is about food and about being fed. And it's kind of a luxury of our time to think about what we can and we can't eat. Because at the meal that Jesus prepared, fish and bread was all there was. And nobody seemed to worry about whether it was gluten-free or whether there was too much mercury in the fish. And I'm not saying we shouldn't think about our food because it is important, but it's a sign of a prosperous, overdeveloped culture where we have the luxury to be so selective about what we eat. Because it wasn't the same in Jesus' time. Access to food in first century Rome was spotty at best. And the lack of good food was one of the reasons there are so many healing miracles in the Gospels, because most of the population in the empire lived around or below subsistence level. And they had inadequate calories and nutrition. And so when Jesus says in the Lord's Prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread," it's not spiritual nurture for which he is petitioning. It's actual food to feed bodies that are malnourished. Because in first century Rome, you would take the chance on the eggs and the steak and the bread because it was literally the difference between life and death. And so we need to read the text, this feeding of the 5,000, in that context. And it's a testament to the importance of food and of breaking bread together that this story is the only one of Jesus' miracles that appears in all 4 of the Gospels. And then in Matthew and Mark, there's another feeding story. They often call it the feeding of the 4,000. And it has the same arc to it as this one does. So altogether, this story, or a variation of this story, is told 6 times in the Gospels. And if you look more closely, you see in the story a formula that is used as Jesus performs the miracle. It says Jesus took the bread, he gave thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to the people. They're the same words that Jesus uses in the Last Supper stories, and they were there in our communion liturgy as well. Jesus took, blessed, broke, and gave. It's called, for those of you who care, the Eucharistic formula. And it's been used from the earliest days of Christianity. And it was inserted into these stories of the feeding of the multitudes to draw the connection between the Lord's Supper that was central to worship in the first century and this miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. It has this sense of Jesus giving of himself, of overcoming the obstacles of the wilderness, because it says he went out into the wilderness. And this idea that there was scarcity, not enough for everyone, and there was darkness on its way. And Jesus took the time to ensure that all are fed, that all eat and are filled. And that is the symbolism behind our communion feast as well. All come, all are filled. But you can't read this story in Matthew's Gospel without reference to another meal which is set in the first part of the chapter. We didn't read it today, but it's there right before this section. And this is a birthday party for Herod Antipas. And this party couldn't be more different, because instead of a meal shared by people who never had enough, the table here is set for those who have way too much. And the story of Herod the Great and his offspring is one of intrigue and betrayal in cooperation with the Roman Empire. And I can't go into all the details now, but suffice it to say that Herod the Great was a client king, what they call a client king of Rome. He was the ruler of Palestine when Jesus was born. So in those days, Herod, do you remember? And he's the one who wanted to get all the children out. Those are our stories. Herod the Great was Herod at the time. He was the ruler. And he was allowed to keep his title of king and the nominal control of his territory in exchange for making sure that it was safe for the Roman armies and the people to move from Syria to Egypt. Syria was above Palestine, Egypt is below. Both of them are part of the Roman Empire. So they said, Herod, go for it. As long as you make it easy for us, you can do what you want in your area. And keeping the peace was so important, and that's why things like sedition or protest against the state are treated so very harshly in first century Palestine. So when Herod the Great died, he divided his kingdom between 3 of his sons and his sister. And Antipas, known as Herod Antipas, was given control of Galilee, where Jesus is from, and Perea. And his brother Philip is given what is now Lower Syria, and Archelaus was given Judea, where Jerusalem is. But he was a particularly bad leader, Archelaus, and so Rome installed Pontius Pilate as the prefect in Judea, where Jerusalem was. But in the Gospels, Antipas, who's the leader of Galilee, where Jesus is from, is just called Herod. So it's kind of confusing sometimes because we have more than one Herod. And he is the Herod who questions Jesus before the crucifixion. If you remember that, he goes to Herod, and Herod says, "Who are you? Who do you say that I am?" So Antipas is married to Herodias. And Herodias is actually his sister-in-law because she was married to his brother first. But they met in Rome and they fell madly in love, and they said, "We'll divorce our spouses and we will get married." And so this caused all kinds of trouble in the region, and particularly for John the Baptist, because he denounced this marriage because it was forbidden under Mosaic law. And his followers now are starting to cause a bit of trouble. They're making a lot of noise. And so Herod, to make sure he can keep the peace, has him put in jail. But Antipas knows that if he executes John the Baptist, his followers will rebel. And so even though his wife, who's particularly mad that John the Baptist would say that her marriage to her loving Herod is not valid, she wants Antipas to get rid of John the Baptist. But he refuses, and he just leaves him in prison while he decides what he's going to do. So Antipas has a birthday, and as a gift, Herodias, his wife, sends her daughter Salome to dance for him. And Antipas is said to be so pleased with her dancing that in front of all the people who have gathered there for his birthday, he grants her any wish. And after she consults with her mother, she asks for the head of John the Baptist. And so the head of John the Baptist is brought in on a platter, and Antipas begins to struggle because he knows he shouldn't have killed John the Baptist. And he actually, when he starts to hear about Jesus, believes that it's John the Baptist who has risen and begun to speak in the name of Jesus. So this is the story that is told just before the feeding of the 5,000, this great party with Herod and Herodias and Salome. And then our text begins because Jesus has just learned of John the Baptist's death. And it says he's gone away to the wilderness to grieve and to rest and to gather his strength. But the people won't leave him alone, and they follow him into the wilderness, and he ends up teaching them and feeding them with this sacred bread. And so we have these two meals. And the question you might be asking yourself, if you're really honest, is which meal would you prefer? Because if I look at them from a purely practical perspective, and even a perspective of enjoying a meal, that birthday of Herod Antipas seems like the better choice. Imagine it with me. You're looking very fine, and the ambiance in the place is amazing because there is wealth on display, and everything is in its place. Everything is just so. And you get to eat with the movers and the shakers of the world, and they might remember you next time you need a favor. And there's lots of variety on the table because the cooks in Herod's palace have brought out the finest of their larder. And you can feast until you can't take another bite. And with such a variety of flavors before you, your head is spinning. And you have a bit too much to drink because the wine is so good and it makes you laugh maybe more than you should. And everybody's so nice to you, reminding you of how important you are and whispering about those revolutionaries who want to overturn the empire. And then there's the dance. She's young and she's beautiful, and the music is mixing so well with the food and the drink. And sure, there's some talk about an evil bargain that Herod is making, but that can't be true. And everything seems perfect. And you finally made it. There's a kind of opulent scarcity at work here. And it's steeped in the idea that there is only so much. And you need to grab what you can when you can. And you must protect what you have from those who are jealous and those who would steal your joy. And you can't really concern yourself with the others who are hungry, because although you have enough, it isn't nearly enough for all of them. And besides, you've earned it. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the fruits of your hard-earned labor. Until all the revelry is broken by the appearance of a servant with a platter and the head of John the Baptist. And suddenly, this fine and fancy meal leaves a horrible taste in your mouth. And you realize behind this hedonistic display of too much food and wealth and wine and music lurks the very worst of humanity: unexamined privilege, jealousy and avarice, scheming, indifference to the plight of the hungry, the hoarding of resources, silencing of the voices of the prophets for the poor. And this meal, so wonderful, so entertaining, has been bought on the backs of the marginalized. And you have a choice to make. Do you stick with these elites, if you want to call them that, who can make your life grand and exciting and without want? Or do you join the Jesus folk? And it's a hard decision, because Jesus' meal is steeped in all the tragedy of human existence. It begins in grief and loss and a bone-tired soul that just needs a moment's rest. And then it continues with the unrelenting needs of the people who are oppressed by the powerful and who lack enough basic resources. And so they wander in the wilderness looking for respite from some itinerant preacher who has a word to say that gives them hope. And then the disciples are worried because they're in a remote spot, and they know that people will soon be hungry, and they're not sure they can handle a crowd who needs to eat. And besides, they only have 5 pitas and 2 fish, not even enough for them. And so they need to protect what they have and keep it away from the rest, or so they think. And it's natural to think that way, because scarcity is all they've known. Send them away, Jesus, so we can be safe and enjoy what little we have. But Jesus is filled with compassion for the people, and he refuses to set up barriers between us and them, and he knows there is enough. And it operates with this mentality of simple abundance. The idea that there's plenty, and God will provide. And it might not be as fancy as what Herod can give you, but it's satisfying, and it's noble, and it's welcoming to all. And so in this act of holy solidarity with God, who promises to provide, Jesus takes the fish and the bread, and he looks to heaven, and he gives thanks for these simple, unadorned blessings that they have received in the wilderness on the edge of civilization. And he breaks the bread, and he gives it to his disciples to distribute. And everyone eats and is satisfied. And there are leftovers too. And when you leave this meal, you realize that as exciting and glamorous as Herod's party might be, it can't compare to the meal that Jesus serves. Because God's table brings the best of who we are. Comfort for those who grieve. Words of hope for those who are seeking something more. Sustenance to feed our bodies. Communion with all humanity at a table of plenty with God as our host, who wants only the best. And what we begin to realize as we see these 2 meals set before us is that we are asked to metaphorically choose over and over between this opulent scarcity and this simple abundance. Where do we set our table? Do we dine with the mighty in all their glory, those like Herod Antipas, who make their fortunes on the backs of the poor, who are indifferent to the hungry, and who set their table for those who can promote their agenda? Or do we eat with the grieving, the struggling, the hungry, the poor, the ones who are thirsting for more? As a people of God, we're called to follow Jesus. And as tempting as it is to eat with Herod Antipas and feast to our heart's content, we're called to a simpler meal in solidarity with all humanity, the average, the outcast, the forgotten, the beloved of God. Simple abundance. There is enough.